Interesting. And we have enough time left for our fourth and last paper before it is Anna's time to speak. I want to thank her in the name of everyone attending here for putting together this wonderful symposium alongside with her team. Thank you so much. So our last paper is Anna Hennessey, and she's the founder of the Society for the Study of Pregnancy and Birth. Her paper is entitled Natality as a Philosophy of Rebirth.
Thank you so much, Florence. Let me share my screen. Does everybody see that, Florence?
We do it full screen, so it's fine.
Okay, great. So I will hop right in. Today I am presenting Natality as a Philosophy of Rebirth. In philosophy, natality is a concept coined most famously in the political philosophy of Hannah Arendt and is often associated with the philosophy of birth. This paper presents natality not as a philosophy of birth, but as a philosophy of rebirth, exploring how people go through new beginnings or rebirths during their lives, and focusing especially on how mothers are socially and symbolically reborn and begin anew when they have children. Natality in the maternal sense can therefore be an existential state whereby mothers transform and are reborn on multiple levels through the act of mothering. More broadly, natality in this sense refers to a philosophy of rebirth in the human experience. All people's beings change in many ways during their lives. Thus, rebirth is more broadly a part of what it is to exist. After first examining the topics of natality and birth in the works of Hannah Arendt and Italian philosopher Adriana Cavarero, the paper branches off to focus on the topic of natality as rebirth in both the maternal experience and in the human experience. The paper then turns briefly to reflect on how studying birth and rebirth in the arts and humanities while also mothering my own children has over the past 15 years folded my intellectual work inside out, leading me to create an artistic project called the Rebirth Tunnel for other people to experience. The tunnels are immersive, matrocentric art installations that participants move through to reach symbolic rebirth. For me, natality as rebirth began as a maternal experience that has since culminated in intellectual, philosophical, and artistic production, the latter of which has brought a natal aesthetic to the public sphere. In The Human Condition, 20th century German-American political philosopher Hannah Arendt explains that the human condition of natality is connected to how newcomers, or those born into the world as strangers, possess the capacity of beginning something anew. Arendt's concept of natality relates to a human capacity to act in the world, especially in the political sense of acting and speaking, through which one's identity is revealed. Neither mothers nor mothering is central to Arendt's work. Arendt's discussion of physiological birth is referenced in terms of the labor and work of a woman's body. And fertility is similarly referred to in the context of animal laborans, or that mode of existence in which humans are like beasts and must produce and labor through the routines of life. Arendt also examines a second birth in the human experience, which she understands as available to humans through action and speech and word and deed. This second birth is not so much a rebirth as it is a new birth of a different part of the self. Quote, "With word and deed, we insert ourselves into the human world, and this insertion is like a second birth in which we confirm and take upon ourselves the naked fact of our original physical appearance. This insertion is not forced upon us by necessity. Its impulse springs from the beginning, which came into the world when we were born and to which we respond by beginning something new on our own initiative." For Arendt, it is through speech and action that humans go through a second birth. Speech and action are distinguished from human bodily existence. The latter is related to physical objects and takes on a lesser status in her philosophy. In her extensive work on Arendt, however, contemporary Italian philosopher Adriana Cavarero extends the concept of natality into the realms of the body and the maternal, Looking at material from Arendt's German notebooks, for example, Caballero points to Arendt's discussion of the rift of copulation and birth, with copulation in Caballero's interpretation indicating a fundamental rupture and subsequent birth and coming into being through the woman's body. Caballero states, quote, "No one of us would be in the world, or as Arendt would have it, would have appeared into the world if a woman's body had not experienced a rupture in the act of giving birth as part of the natural cycle of regeneration, that is, of the necessity of organic life," end quote. Caballero's exploration of Arendt's philosophy of natality concerning physiological birth in the maternal body is appealing. But this concept of natality in the maternal life also expands past begetting children and into the sphere of what it is to raise them. Natality in the maternal sense could also be an existential state whereby mothers transform and are reborn on multiple levels through mothering. After birth or adoption, mothers go through a transformation that is of a social ontological nature. I have written at length about social ontology. It was central to the thesis of my first book, Imagery, Ritual, and Birth: Ontology Between the Sacred and the Secular. Social ontology pertains to the social nature of something or someone's being. To give a common example from the field of social ontology, money has a social ontology, which fundamentally pertains to its social meaning and transcends its physical nature. In other words, on a physical level, money's ontology is related to its nature as a piece of paper or physical object. But at the social level, money's ontology is related to what humans construe it to be or mean. People collectively understand money not simply as a piece of paper, but as a medium of exchange, and the understanding becomes institutionalized. This is part of money's social ontology. Returning to birth and mothering, all women and others identifying as mothers go through a rite of passage and social rebirth when they become mothers, which is socially recognized and transforms their identities to that of mother. However, mothers also go through multiple rebirths as they and their families grow, age, and change. Natality and maternity merge in a mother's life and existence through the child's passage of developmental milestones, for example, which often become a mother's milestones in her psyche. Whether the milestone be that of smiling, laughing, crawling, eating solid food, walking or talking for the first time, going to school, driving a car, or any other of the myriads of milestones children go through, for many mothers, a rebirth of the self, sometimes big and sometimes small, takes place during these moments. Canadian scholar and professor Andrea O'Reilly has explored a mother-centered feminist theory and politics in her extensive work on matricentric feminism, including in her 2016 book, Matricentric Feminism, and her 2024 volume, The Mother Wave, among her many other publications. Drawing from her work, some of my previous research has focused on matricentric art, which explores birth and art about birth, not natality and rebirth in the context of matricentric art. Yet some of my findings point to this exact phenomenon of rebirth in the maternal experience of the mother artist. One area of interest to the research, for example, revolves around the finding of an increased artistic production and energy that some of the female artists studied report experiencing after becoming mothers. Canadian artist Kate Hansen, for example, explains how she and her artwork transformed after she had become a mother and had children. Quote, "Contrary to the popular belief that art making is one of the things that falls to the wayside after the birth of children, in my case, I felt inspired and compelled by my experience of childbirth and motherhood. It was almost as though the creative act of making another human being awoke a creative drive in me," end quote. Hansen created her Madonna and Child project when her two children were babies and toddlers. Thus, she had to eke out time to paint when they were sleeping, in part because Kate did not have significant help in raising her children early on. What Hansen describes as a rebirth and renewal, a natality emerging both in her being and artwork after she had become a mother. Nadia Burton, a sociologist and professor of midwifery who edited the 2015 volume Natal Signs, Cultural Representations of Pregnancy, Birth, and Parenting, has also described natal aesthetics, which is a powerful way of creating change and envisioning the future. The phenomena of birth, natality, and rebirth through maternal life have also emerged repeatedly in my own life, impacting both my scholarship over the years and more recently, my art making on the topics of birth and rebirth. The physiological, psychological, social, and emotional transformations I went through after going through pregnancy, birth, and early mothering found an outlet and intellectual passage through my writing shortly after I had given birth to my son in 2009 and my daughter in 2011. Since then, I have written and presented for both academic and wider audiences about a range of topics centered on birth. Pregnancy, birth, and mothering, all physical dimensions of my life, revitalized my intellectual being. Birth, I have suggested, while a topic of physical and psychological interest, is also one of philosophical and intellectual fascination. Around 2017, I also began researching and publishing on the topic of rebirth after trauma through art, as well as the concept of the eternal return to life in philosophy and the history of religions. For the purposes of this presentation, I will say that my research on all of this coincided both with a personal rebirth that I was experiencing in my own life and with a material shift through which I was trying to express my ideas on the topic of rebirth. The shift occurred in the form of a specific art project that I began creating in 2023, which is called the Rebirth Tunnel Immersive Art Installation. The personal rebirth I experienced, and from which the Rebirth Tunnel also emerged, involved traveling to Ireland with my two children, then aged 10 and 12, in the summer of 2022. We held a small ceremony by the banks of the River Shannon, ripping up paper that had important words I had written on it related to sad events and how I was raised, and then we buried the pieces in the mud on the riverbank together. My ethnic origin is Irish American, and the children and I were in part saying goodbye to ancestors, family of origin members, and intergenerational trauma. The ceremony did not last long, just a few minutes, and I did not expect much out of it. But over a period of a few days and then lasting into weeks, I began to feel a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. I was light and free and realized that something important and fundamental had happened that day by the River Shannon. I had gone through a personal rebirth. My children have since then also commented on the ceremony at various points, as well as on their feelings of a reconnection to their Irish heritage. My son now plays both the Highland pipes and the traditional Irish Uilleann pipes, and my daughter is an Irish dancer. Both children have since performed twice in San Francisco's St. Patrick's Day Parade. This story from my life, as well as all the past intellectual work on birth and rebirth, are intimately connected to the psychological fabric that the Rebirth Tunnel immersive art installation is made of. It was in these overlapping contexts of life, intellectual work, and my family that my ideas for the Rebirth Tunnel art project began to form, leading to creation of an immersive space for others through which to process life events, particularly something of a traumatic nature that had affected them personally or was part of something broader and related to society. I will now briefly sketch out what it is that people experience when they participate in the Rebirth Tunnel immersive art installation. So far, I've been able to make two tunnels, one at an academic conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, and one here in San Francisco for a low-income public housing community. The tunnels were similar, but the contexts were different. However, in both cases, participants have responded in very positive ways. I received a small grant from the American Academy of Religion to make the first tunnel, and a few donations from local nonprofits in San Francisco to make the second one. My budget for both of those was very small, and I could not create an elaborate tunnel, but the conceptual piece I created served the purpose well and as a prototype for the tunnel I am currently working on. Just a few weeks ago, I received a larger grant from the Henry Luce Foundation and am in the process of creating a more developed tunnel. The images that I'm showing you are from the earlier events. Having researched and experienced rites of passage, and especially birth as a rite of passage, I knew when preparing the project that when people begin the rite, they must first enter a liminal space that is of neither a secular nor sacred nature. I had to bring participants into a middle space, which would help them to psychologically exit the sphere they had just been in, whether it was the conference or the public housing community. After that, I could have them enter the Rebirth tunnel, which was the sacred space. The first indications participants receive that they have entered this liminal space is their encounters with me and the other people who are part of the project. As a rebirth midwife, I dressed very differently from how I usually dress. This makes me stand out in large part so that the participants begin to understand that they are entering a different space. Janice Poss served as the Rebirth doula in Las Vegas, and Ernestine Bernard served as the Rebirth doula in San Francisco. Both of them also dressed differently and were accompanied by spaces with rings of flowers so as to be a part of the rite. Those who perform as guides in rites of passage traditions across cultures wear special or different garments. Before entering the Rebirth tunnel, all participants receive a brochure. The brochure is a key part of the experience because it brings participants into the liminal space of the event by providing them with a document about the process they will be going through. This helps to further remove them from the secular space. The brochure for the event provides all participants with clear guidelines to the steps of the rite that they're about to undergo. The three main steps are 1, enter the reconception pod, 2, enter the rebirth tunnel, and 3, receive your rebirth certificate. In addition to giving participants the brochure, I also handed them a small plain note card. Participants then began their rebirth experience by processing the self in a reconception pod before entering the tunnel. At the previous events, for those who did not want to enter the pods, we provided them with a decorated table at which they could sit or stand by themselves. However, we found that most participants wanted to enter the pod. Alone in the pod, participants might spend time reading the brochure, and they all write statements on their blank note cards while enclosed in the pod. One option of what to write on the card is either about something they would like to shed from themselves, most often a memory, or about a hope for the future. I will now show you a short video from the event in Las Vegas of what happened once participants exited the reconception pods and entered the actual rebirth tunnel. It was a conference setting, but one thing we discovered was that a university classroom was a wonderful space for the rebirth tunnel experience to take place because we only allowed one participant in at a time, and there are 2 doors in a typical classroom. So the person naturally traveled through one door and exited out the other one. This created a small, enclosed, and private space for the participant. At the middle archway and center of the tunnel, you will see that participants encounter a rebirth box, an object integral to the rebirth experience, because it is the place where the participants read their written statements either out loud or to themselves and then discard of them. While moving through the tunnel, participants also hear verbal affirmations of love played through recordings, and they see a projection of an animated image of a child who looks off into a peaceful valley. Since details such as race and gender of the child are hard to see, many participants see the image of the child as a symbolic representation of their own childhood self.
You are safe to let go. You are allowed to celebrate your achievements and milestones. You are deserving of unconditional love and acceptance. You are allowed to embrace your uniqueness and individuality. You are encouraged to love yourself and look after yourself.
Upon completion of the tunnel, participants receive rebirth certificates, which they sign themselves, an act that helps them to be present with their own name and self as the ritual ends. The document also contains the place and date of the rebirth event, as well as both my signature and the rebirth doula's signature. Many of the participants who completed the tunnels have explained a sense of renewal upon completion. For some, the experience was emotional, much more than we had imagined. There was a diverse range of participants across gender, race, religion, and age. And I've begun recording individual responses of their experiences on the Rebirth Tunnel webpage, which is part of my own website. In some cases, the doulas and I witnessed instances where people engaged strongly with the event. In conclusion, I will say that in my case, there has been a material and artistic output and rebirth which stems from life mothering my children. Motherhood was the catalyst for multiple rebirths in my life, which have involved physical, psychological, emotional, communal, and other transformations in my person. My intellectual output and the Rebirth Tunnel installation are physical and now even embodied manifestations of how these changes have been processed in my own life, ultimately creating a new form of natality along the path of my existence. And thank you. That's the end of this. And I'll just say one last thing, which is serendipitously, an article I've written, which is based on this whole talk, was just published in the 25th anniversary issue of the Journal of the Motherhood Initiative, which is Andrea O'Reilly's journal. So you can find that. It's already available online.
Thank you so much, Anna. Maybe you can also link to this article. I think this journal is in open access. So maybe if you have the link, we can share it through the chat. And now it's wonderful because we still have about 17 minutes, maybe